Hello and welcome to our webinar, Dementia Conversations, Driving, Doctor Visits, Legal and Financial Planning. I'm Mike Bias with the Alzheimer's Association. I'm coming to you from Illinois, and before I introduce our speaker today, I want to let you know about your screen, what you're looking at. Obviously, over here is the PowerPoint presentation, and that'll show you all the slides as we go along. Directly under that is the Q&A pod. Now, the Q&A pod is where you can write your questions in, and then toward the end of our hour together, our speaker will take those questions. It is anonymous, so no one else will be able to see your name or your question. So if you'd like to go ahead and use that Q&A pod right now, we'd love to see where you're from. So how about if you type in your zip code so we can have an idea of who's actually logging in. I know we have people registered for today from everywhere from Massachusetts out to California and Montana and Florida. So if you want to go ahead and type your zip code into the Q&A pod, we can see where you're from. And speaking of Massachusetts, right below me is our speaker for today. Jill Hovanation is joining us from the Massachusetts New Hampshire chapter of the Alzheimer's Association. Jill is a memory specialist working for the Dementia Care Coordination Program at Massachusetts New Hampshire chapter of the Alzheimer's Association. She received her master's in social work at Salem State University with a focus on older adults and end-of-life care. Jill's worked for the association for about 2.5 years, and prior to that, she worked in hospice care and at a dementia-specific adult day health program. Good afternoon, Jill. How are you?
Good afternoon, Mike. I'm good, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go ahead and turn off my camera, and I'm going to let you take it away.
Great, thank you. And thank you all for joining me today. I'm looking forward to sharing tips that will hopefully help make these challenging conversations feel a bit more manageable. So, as Mike shared, the three topics that we'll be discussing today are going to the doctor, driving, and making legal and financial plans. Of course, these are all really sensitive topics, right? And we may fear that we may hurt our loved one by bringing them up. Though these topics can be challenging, they are really important to discuss and to discuss early on. Starting these conversations early allows for proactive versus reactive planning and allows your loved one to be as engaged in their care planning as possible. During this program, we're going to develop some skills to help address these topics. So today we'll share some tools for how to start the conversation, how to plan ahead, what resources might be available to you, and you'll also get to hear from some other caregivers who have had these conversations and what their experience looked like. So these topics are scary, right? There could be a whole host of different reasons why we aren't already having the conversation. We may think that we're impeding on our loved ones' lives by bringing it up. We may worry about taking away our loved one's autonomy, or we may even be thinking that another family member is already having this conversation with our loved one. Though they are, of course, scary, right? There's a lot of reasons why it can be helpful to start the conversation. And we're going to talk about some general success tips for successful conversations, and then we'll apply those concepts to each of our topics today. So to start with, sooner is better than later, which of course is much easier said than done. You'll hear this reinforced throughout this program, but what we mean by this is the earlier that we have this conversation, again, the sooner your loved one is able to engage in this conversation, the more they're able to make their wishes known and they're able to be part of their care planning. We want to make sure we're thinking about the who, what, where, when, and how. So who's going to be part of the conversation? What topic are you going to focus on? Where and when should the conversation happen? And how do we start it? So when we think about starting it, we may want to start with asking our loved ones, if I notice some changes, Do you want me to point them out so we can discuss them? The answer to this question can really help inform the rest of the conversation. If the answer to the question is no, we want to take the time to validate our loved one's feelings. They may be experiencing a lot of fear or anxiety around these changes. Take notes about your observations and come prepared to the conversation with these points. Try to remember throughout these conversations to use I statements, right? So we want to try to avoid blaming or criticizing. That could elicit a defensive response. For example, we might instead say, I noticed some changes in your memory. I'm concerned and I want to make sure you're okay. So come prepared with your concerns, but also come prepared with the next step, right? So you're not just delivering kind of the bad news, so to speak. Once you've expressed your concern, offer a suggestion for what to do next. So if you've expressed concerns about your loved one's memory, your next step might be, let's make an appointment with a neurologist who was referred by a friend. And this is the time of day part, right? So this part is fairly important for preparations to have this conversation. We want to think about what's our loved one's most relaxed time of day, when do they feel their best. We want to plan it at a time that we don't have to rush to an appointment or anything afterwards. And also, if possible, we want to try and build in some sort of self-care afterwards, right? So you deserve a reward after bringing up this topic and discussing it, and it's hard for both you and your loved one, right? It's tiring. So think about maybe building in some self-care after the conversation is done. So we're going to start by discussing going to the doctor. This image here, you'll see there's this barrier, right? So oftentimes it can feel like there's this barrier between noticing the changes and experiencing these feelings and actually getting to the doctor. You know, when someone in our life exhibits behavior or thinking changes, it's important to be aware that these could be signs of a dementia causing illness such as Alzheimer's disease. As we get older, we may notice some normal changes being something like taking longer to come up with someone's name, but something that's not normal is getting lost in a familiar place or asking really repetitive questions. This barrier that exists, it's really emotionally packed, right? Thinking about these changes, there's a lot of strong emotions for both us as caregivers and for our loved ones. So this conversation may feel a bit awkward. However, for many people living in these early stages of dementia, they may already be experiencing noticing some changes in themselves. So next we're going to hear from Donna. Donna is a caregiver and she's going to talk about the importance of having the conversation.
I think you have to be honest. I think that's the important thing with it. To get a loved one to the doctor. I think you just need to be candid and honest of what are you trying to do. We're trying to understand what we're up against. It's just so important to do that because you can't battle something that you don't know what you're battling. Again, it may not have been Alzheimer's. It could have been depression. It could have been so many other things. And guess what? There's other things you can do to take care of those issues as well. But that's what you need to be able to do. You can't ignore something. It's not going to go away.
Yeah, so as Donna shares here, I like how she said we have to know what we're up against, right, before we can move forward with any sort of care planning. So for some people, suggesting to go to the doctor and having that initial part of the conversation is enough to get this process started. For others, we may have to think about other ways to present and support our loved ones through this process and throughout this conversation. So for instance, thinking about what's most comfortable for your loved one, for some people the word Alzheimer's is a scary word, right? It's loaded, it might be some family link or just a general kind of image of what that looks like. So instead, we can present our concerns in a way that feels a bit more comfortable and manageable. In my work here at the association, I work a lot with caregivers around finding effective and really kind ways to communicate. So, for example, we might instead say, let's talk to the doctor about the things that you're having more trouble doing. So you could also normalize the appointment, right, and explain it as time for your annual visit. Medicare does offer this free annual wellness visit, which does include a dementia screening. You can learn more about that visit if you're interested. This wellness visit at Medicare.org. But again, I think normalizing it, right? That it's time for your annual visit. Let's go check in with the doctor and let's see what's going on. So again, this is a hard conversation. So think about something that you can do after the appointment. This is a hard conversation and a hard visit, right? The appointment itself could be really tiring. So think about sandwiching this appointment with something enjoyable and that's something that can redirect both ourselves as caregivers and for our loved ones. So you might go for a treat afterwards, visit a family member, go for a walk, something that can make this experience a bit more tolerable for both of you. Take the opportunity to express your concerns to the doctor. Your loved one might not have full insight to the changes they're experiencing, so it's important in order for the doctor to have a really clear picture of what's going on for us to express our concerns. Even in the case that, let's say, the doctor doesn't have permission to share information with you, you can still express your concerns to the doctor. That might be in the form of a letter, a voicemail, an email if you have access to the doctor that way, or trying to pull the doctor or nurse aside before the actual appointment. There are times when our loved one might still be reluctant to going to the doctor even after trying all of these strategies. In this case, we need to communicate in a way that makes the most sense to our loved one. Our loved ones living with dementia may be living in their own reality, right? So different insight, different understanding of what's going on. So we want to try and join that reality as much as possible. For example, we may present this appointment as something required by the doctor or something required by our healthcare insurance provider. This may be a bit more palatable and may make more sense for our loved ones living with dementia, again, allowing us to join them in their reality. So next, we're going to start talking about driving, which again, of course, is a really hot topic. This might be, excuse me, this might be one of the first really challenging conversations you're faced with throughout this process. It is, of course, wrapped up in a lot of emotions again, right? Independence, autonomy. Our loved ones may have been drivers for 50 years by the time this comes up. So, of course, for those reasons and many others, it's a really sensitive topic. So next we're going to hear from Chris, and he'll share a little bit about his experience with his father.
He loves driving. There's no exact answer on this is when you stop driving. You could tell when coming up to an intersection, as an example, the ability to understand what's going on around you was starting to deteriorate a little bit. Being on the highway with cars on both sides becomes a little bit more difficult. And first and foremost, the safety of everybody in the car as well as other drivers on the road. You think about that and you want to make sure you're not putting anybody in danger. But then the difficult part is telling your dad, who you love, and you know he loves driving, and he's used to it, that he can no longer do that. But then even then, taking the keys away full time was very difficult. The doctor was very helpful in just saying, medically, you can't do this anymore. But my mother had the hardest time with this because she knew how much this was going to hurt him as well. And this is one of the first things that we had to deal with as a family when it came to telling my dad that he had to stop doing something because of this disease. That meant a lot to him.
Yeah, so like Chris shared, he started to see these warning signs and he shared a little bit about how he addressed these concerns. And we'll expand a little bit on what he shared. So these are some tips that other caregivers have found helpful when starting this conversation. Planning ahead. So even before you notice changes, talk to your loved one about what it will look like to eventually stop driving. Start the conversation early, again, right? So our loved one can be as engaged as possible in this conversation and talk about what plans will look like. How does your loved one want this addressed when this becomes an issue? Once you notice these changes, have this plan in place and take notes during this initial conversation so you can address it appropriately when these changes start to happen. Try to be specific with your concerns. So again, this is where we want to be mindful to try and use I statements. For example, last week I noticed you had a hard time getting to our grocery store, which concerned me. We want to consider how this message will be received and want to make clear that it's coming from a caring, supportive place. When we're thinking about our loved one's sense of responsibility, that might look like asking our loved one, how would it feel if you or someone else was hurt while you were driving? This really speaks to our loved one's concern for others and can be a really meaningful way to approach the conversation. Next, we're going to hear from Sheila, another caregiver, who used some of these strategies to have this conversation with her father.
Some tips on having the conversation is pointing out, especially for my father, the potential danger to others that it may cause if he's behind the wheel. And just talking about it from the standpoint that this is not only the best thing for you, but this is also the best thing for others around you. And these are some of the alternatives, making sure that this is what's going to happen, having a plan. If mom can't take you, then Uncle Thomas or will be here to take you, and we will make sure that you're getting out of the house and that you're doing some things. So, presenting the bad news, but then also presenting the plan. And for my father, that's really, really important to have a plan.
Yeah, so as Sheila shared, she talked about a plan, right? Having this sort of plan B to present along with the bad news as she shared. So an alternative plan, sometimes we can get a little creative with this. What we want to make sure is that our loved ones are able to maintain their social connections. They want to get to appointments, go on errands, and we want them to be able to remain as independent as is safe, right? So when we think about these transportation options, we may be thinking about using some local resources like the senior center, if there's a medical ride service in your area. Also thinking about informal support, so family members, or maybe reaching out to a local college student or even your faith community. At some point, it might be helpful to pull in the support of a third party, someone who's an outside party, objective, maybe even authoritative, if you think of it that way. I'm thinking of someone like the primary care physician if you have a good relationship with that doctor. Getting that outside party can be a way to kind of take that onus off of you a little bit, right? And have your family member hear from someone who they also trust and is objective. Of course, throughout this entire conversation, we want to keep our loved ones' emotions in mind. This can be a real loss for someone. Think about ways to minimize this person's sense of loss by approaching it as maybe driving retirement versus approaching it as giving something or being forced to give something up. Next, we're going to hear from Wendy. She shares a little bit about using empathy throughout this conversation.
Talking to somebody about stopping driving, I think it's most important to understand that that is tied to someone's independence more than most things. And so by saying you can't do this anymore is like telling the person, it's like ripping away their independence. And that doesn't feel good for anybody. I know that I've always tried to put myself in that situation. What would I think if someone was saying this to me? You don't get to do this anymore. And how would I feel? And how would I want somebody to talk to me about this? And so if you try to I think sometimes too many people try to approach it as, very punitive. And I'm doing what's right for you. So why don't you understand, without really turning the tables and putting themselves in that position, understanding, how helpless that feels to take those things away. It's important to be thoughtful about what that experience is like for the individual.
Yeah, so like Wendy shared, we want to take the time before we start this conversation to really think about our loved ones specifically. What will this feel like for them? And how can we make sure we approach it in the most kind and caring way? Our last topic that we'll discuss today is making legal and financial plans. Again, as challenging as it can be to have these conversations, we do want to have them early. And this conversation, it's wrapped up in a lot of care planning for the future, right? Making sure we know our loved ones' wishes. So it really can be beneficial to start it early so we can have our loved one engaged and give them the opportunity to share what they want. So we're going to hear from Chris again. Chris is going to share the importance of making these plans for the costs of long-term care.
Financially, this disease will increase the cost of living. It's just a fact. So planning for those extra costs is that much more important than what you were planning for before. And so you have to review everything that's in place, see what changes need to be made, both legally and financially, and you have to monitor that going forward afterwards too.
Yeah, so as Chris spoke a bit about gathering documents, making plans for the future, and we'll talk more about that in these next few slides. So we're also going to hear from Sheila. Sheila is another caregiver who shares some insights into, again, the importance of the conversation, but making sure we hold this empathy throughout it, right? Certainly these conversations are difficult. They can feel uncomfortable. We may feel reluctant for, again, a whole host of reasons, right? It's sensitive information, so we may fear that we're impeding on our loved one's independence by bringing this up. Again, Sheila will talk about why it is important to have it, but how to make sure we have empathy throughout.
Here's what I've come to after all of this. That it's the most loving and kind thing you can do for them is to be honest with them and say, this is like a really scary thing. And I feel a lot of discomfort bringing this up to you. But I tell them, if you're going to be the one who's going to take them on this journey, then you have to tell them, I'm going to be here on this journey with you. And there are things that we have to do to get this in place. We're going to go on this journey together. I've told you I'm going to be here with you till the end. So let's get this ready. It's like we're going to go on an ocean ship. We've got to get things packed up. We've got to figure out what we're taking with us. We got to get ready. And the things that we have to get ready, we have to make sure that we know which doctors you're going to be using. I need to get this signed, okay? So that if you go in there and they have to do surgery, for example, I got to have this durable power of attorney for health care for you. I have to have this worked out, okay? Now, if for some reason, okay, you need to go to rehab after something, I have to have these documents here, the financial stuff, so I can get these things taken care of for you while this is going on. I don't want to have anything get in the way of us being able to progress and keep doing this. I said, it seems hard because it's hard in our heads. Everybody's read about people who've stolen from elderly people, who've done these horrible things. But if you're the person who's approaching this with loving kindness and compassion, and you're willing to take this person on this journey, you're not doing a bad thing. You're doing the right thing by talking to them about it. And you approach it from the standpoint of, I'm here for you. I'm doing this for you. We're going to do this together, and I'm going to help you through this. And these are the tools that I need to make sure that we can do this.
So Julie has this kind approach, right? And she really reinforces that we're in it together. This is really important because it's a hard conversation as it is, but to then be able to normalize and provide that support to our loved one, to make sure they know that we're partnering through this. We are in it together now, and we will be in the future. And part of making these plans is to make sure I can be there for you in the exact right way you want. So start with asking questions. This first part of the conversation, you might be asking what documents exist, who has copies of these documents, and gather them all together so you can figure out, okay, what's completed and what do we need to complete. Again, normalize this process. Normalize to your loved one that as we get older, this is a normal part of planning that we have to do to make sure that we can get the best care possible for the future. I think normalization is a really kind way of making it feel okay for us. So break the conversation up into parts. So like that first part that we talked about, that information gathering stage, that might be part one. And then part two might be more focused on the finances. This is a heavy topic, so don't feel that you need to get to everything in one sitting. Involve others. So we want to make sure that anyone that's part of our care team, I'm thinking even more specifically about anyone providing direct support, so families, family members, friends, it's important for them to be part of this process so they know, for instance, who is the healthcare proxy, what are mom or dad's or my sister's or my husband's wishes for care in the future, and to know what resources are available so we can plan appropriately. So as we just touched on, this is sort of the core part of this care team, right? So this process, having these conversations is hard, but providing care to a loved one living with dementia is harder. So we want to think about identifying care team members and then talking with them, saying, this is the support that I need. I consider you part of this care team, and looping everyone in so everyone's on the same page. So this center part of the care team, this family part, this might be cousins, sisters, brothers, uncles, aunts, or close friends who you've chosen as family. Whether these team members, so to speak, live locally or at a distance, they can still be part of this process to provide support both to your loved one and to you throughout this process. Next part is the medical team, the medical part of your care team. Oftentimes, I think when we think about medical support, we think about the primary care physician. But if we expand on that a little bit, we can think about the medical team as anyone providing support both to you and to your loved one. So that might be a neurologist, a psychologist, social worker, psychiatrist. Anyone that's treating or caring for either of you could be considered part of this medical team. Peer support is invaluable during this process. Peers might be friends, neighbors, or other caregivers. Peers can really be a tremendous source of support, and I think especially emotional support. One great way to receive care support is maybe to consider going to a caregiver support group. Place. Anyone that's part of this care team, I'm thinking maybe even more specifically part of the family friends care team, can connect with their HR department to see if their work offers any caregiver benefits, and also to discuss workplace flexibility for down the line when maybe you're needed in a more direct way. And lastly, community resources. So there are pretty varied community resources out there. This might be an aging service agency, it might be your senior center or veteran services. There are typically in each community some sort of support or information center where you can get more support for the long term and making sure that you have the resources you need. Certainly, if you don't know about your local resources or if you want to learn more, you can always call our helpline and we can help you get connected. So next, I'm going to kick it over to Mike, and Mike is going to share a little bit more about the resources that we offer here at the Alzheimer's Association.
Great. Well, thank you, Jill. Probably the most important thing is to know that you can start by contacting the association at our 24/7 nationwide helpline at 800-272-3900. You can call anytime, day or night. It doesn't matter where you're calling from. Trained specialists will be there to answer your call and address your concerns, whether you need information and referrals, some quick advice, or you have some questions about research or about public policy or what's happening. ALZ.org is for the people who would prefer to let their fingers do the walking. And you can go to ALZ.org and find just about anything there. However, there's so much there and there's so many places to look, sometimes people don't know where to click. So I always tell them, if you're not sure, if you're looking for more than a minute or two, just call the helpline. They'll tell you where to click to quickly find what you're looking for. Now, some things that can be accessed there that I'd like to just call out. Alzheimer's Navigator. A navigator is somebody who helps you get to where you're going at a great distance in the shortest possible time. And whether you access Alzheimer's Navigator through the alz.org website, or you can go to alznavigator.org, whichever way you get there, you're going to find a very, very helpful tool. What it does is it'll ask you some questions, and based upon those questions, it will then tell you, okay, here's what's coming up in this Alzheimer's journey that you should probably be thinking about. It looks like you cared for this and this, but you might want to be thinking about this, and this might be coming down the road. So Alzheimer's Navigator is very, very valuable. Now, if you'd prefer, you can, through the helpline, calling the 800 number, set up a care navigation appointment with a master's level master's level clinician, and they will do that with you over the phone if a local office is not near to your home. Community Resource Finder is another thing where you can go there. You can go to communityresourcefinder.org, or you can go through the alz.org main website. But there, what you'll do is you'll type in your zip code, and then what type of resources are you looking for? Maybe you're looking for a referral to a physician, a neurologist, a specialist. Maybe you're looking for in-home care or a residential facility. Now, whatever you're looking for, we have a non-endorsement policy. Our practice is just to give you a list of all of the resources in your area, and then you can ask for tips so that you know what questions to ask so that you can make the decision which provider is best for you. Finally, alzconnected.org is very, very valuable. We recommend that everybody who's a caregiver check out a support group. And the biggest concern people have is I'm going to go there, I don't know anybody, and they're going to ask me to spill my guts about my life story. That's not what happens. Most people who go to a support group meeting the first time, they don't even say anything except hi and my name is. Because everyone else there, it was their first time. So we really strongly recommend you check out a support group. Now, you can find those through the helpline or the Community Resource Finder. But if it's not convenient with respect to distance or time, you can access alzconnected.org, which is an online support community. That's where you have an anonymous screen name where you log on, so it preserves your anonymity, but now you can connect with other people who are in the same situation as you are, and you can read what other people have said, tips, and different parts of this whole journey. It's very, very helpful. Now, obviously, you know about our webinars at alzwebinars.org, and if you don't know, you know that when you go to the website, you can sign up for a webinar, but if you scroll to the bottom, you can watch 9 to 12 pre-recorded webinars from the past. So you don't have to wait for one to come up. You can look through the past recorded titles and see if anything is helpful and watch it on demand. So with that, I would like to see if there are any questions for Jill. Um, the first question, Jill, is what if my loved one doesn't have Alzheimer's? It's another type of dementia. What help can you provide to us then?
That's a great question. Um, so here at the Alzheimer's Association, we can provide support to people living with suspected memory changes, to advanced Alzheimer's disease, to anyone living with any other dementia causing illness. So, whether that be frontotemporal lobe, Lewy body, Parkinsonian dementia, we really try to care for the whole spectrum of people living with some sort of memory or cognitive impairment. So, certainly, please don't hesitate to reach out. We hope to be able to provide support to you.
Great, great, great. Okay, another question is my sister doesn't seem to be on board. I'm not sure if she's in denial or what, but she just doesn't want to face the reality that mom has dementia. What can I do?
That's really hard. And as I'm sure, as I'm sure you're aware, right? Any of family conflict or difference in opinions is very common in the process of caring for someone living with dementia. So first, know that this is really normal. Second, this is a challenge, and I appreciate that this isn't an easy issue to address. Certainly, your sister sounds like she's understanding your mom's changes maybe differently or maybe not recognizing them. And a couple options are if your sister were open to connecting with the Alzheimer's Association, or let's say if you watched a program and you like that program, you might refer her to it and say, hey, you know what, I want to get your opinion on this as well. Um, that might be one way to approach it. I got that idea from my friend Mike here. What are your thoughts, Mike?
Yeah, I think the main thing is it's hard when you're in the forest to see the trees, and what someone can't hear from you as a close relative, they can hear from an objective third party. So we've seen this a lot where the family members have a care navigation appointment with a care navigator, and sometimes they're all in one room, and sometimes they're a speakerphone, and someone's calling from Florida, and someone's calling from Maine, and anyway they get together and they discuss it, and then one of the family members will say, okay, I get it, after the care navigator said something, and then their sibling said, I've been telling you that for 6 months, and now you get it. But that's the way we are. I'm the same way. We all have our blind spots. So that's what we're here for. And as Jill mentioned, whether it's dementia with Lewy bodies or vascular dementia or Alzheimer's, we are here for you. So next question. Mom clearly has Alzheimer's or some other dementia, but the doctor will not talk to me because she has not signed the HIPAA form. What can I
Yeah,
do?
that I can appreciate that. That's challenging when you're not maybe feeling like you can't speak openly. What I'll say is, even with, of course, even with HIPAA in place, the doctor isn't able, sounds like doesn't have permission to speak with you, but you can still express your concerns to the doctor. So you can talk to the doctor in the form of maybe you write a letter or an email or leave a voicemail or try and pull the doctor aside before the appointment, whatever that looks like. You can still communicate to the doctor even if the doctor can't communicate back.
Yeah, so I like the expression the doctor can't talk, but he
Mm,
can listen, and especially if he gets a letter that's succinct but specific, saying, "Mom, I think my mom is having memory problems." That doesn't help the doctor. But if you say, yesterday she asked me 6 different times what we were having for lunch, and we had already eaten lunch, something very specific, or a log, that will alert the doctor to modify his exam accordingly. So they can't talk to you, but they can always listen. So yes, take advantage of that. Okay, I think we've got one more question, and this is one of my favorite questions because I think like a man sometimes. Um, Dad should not be driving, but he still wants to drive. I'm considering disabling the car. What do you think of that?
that's a good question, and it's a creative thought. I appreciate your willingness to look at how to intervene here. What I'll say is that, I've heard of a similar intervention like that before. I think my concern about disabling the car, or, some people will do like a kill switch or something like that. My concern is that the car is still there, right? So it's the access to the car that I'd be concerned about. For someone living with dementia, especially, if one of their primary symptoms is short-term memory loss, is even if we try all of the strategies we discussed, right, and you try this to disable the car, someone living with dementia might see the car and not remember any of that, so still may try to have access. Um, Also, if your father, I think it was that you said, if your father has the ability to call a mechanic and have the car fixed, that's challenging too. So, um, generally speaking, I'd say if we're concerned about our loved one living with dementia and we're concerned that they may have access to the car, I think the best thing to do is try to access. So park it elsewhere, have a family member borrow the car or actually borrow the car. Anything you can do kind of out of sight, out of mind, so to speak. What are your thoughts, Mike?
I really like that a lot because in the past I've thought of if you disconnect the spark plug coil, the car is inoperative and the problem is solved. But as you had mentioned, Jill, if they have a friend or a mechanic and they make a phone call and that person doesn't know that there's a problem, then well, suddenly you don't even realize it and they're out driving again. So that does not it's a stopgap measure, but it's not a permanent solution. So yes, definitely we need the doctor or medical professional to be the bad guy, the bearer of bad news, to say you shouldn't be driving, and then at that point having the car out of sight, out of mind is the best possible solution. Great. Okay, well, I think that's about all the time we have for today. I want to thank you all for logging in and joining us. I hope that you will let your friends and other loved ones know about alzwebinars.org, where they can view this and other webinars live or recorded on demand. And thank you, Jill. We appreciate you joining us to share your time
Thanks
and
for
talent
having
with
me,
us.
Mike, and thank you, everyone.
Well, you have a great day, and we'll see you next time at alzwebinars.org.